I was looking at the app I like to use when trying to find free stuff when I happened to see the one for this blower. Now fortunately, I saw the ad very soon after it was posted and immediately drove to the location and picked it up. But there is one huge problem with it. It looks too new to be given away. So why would anyone give away a brand new blower then? Well, you're about to see why, and it's a pretty good reason too. So in today's video, we're going to be looking at this Poulan leaf blower. And the problem is that I just picked it up and I don't know anything about it. Now before you say they went battery electric, I will tell you one thing. They were also giving away a battery leaf blower too. So unless they decided to go with a broom and dustpan, there must be a good reason for them to give it away. Now before we go any further with this project, I'm going to document all the stickers that I can. That way, if we need to order any new parts, we'll have the information we need to get the right ones. Now the blower is not unused, but by how it looks, it's not been used all that much. And the only other time I see this is when a blower has been damaged because someone used straight gasoline in it. But that's pretty easy to figure out. All we have to do is pull on the rope and see how much the engine fights back, which it does. Now if it is easy to pull over, you'll need to do a compression test to find out. Next, I want to put some fuel into the carb and then see if it'll start and run. Well, that was a bit unexpected. It started and ran for quite some time. Now, this was not a demonstration of a working carb, but instead it gives us an idea on the health of the engine. I'm really tempted to just put fuel into the tank, purge the air from the system, and then try starting it. Now, the first real test is whether or not the purge bulb will fill with any fuel, which it does. I have to mention this, if the purge bulb does not fill with any fuel, the likelihood that the engine will start and run is very low. So if yours does not fill with fuel, I wouldn't even bother trying to start it. Now surprisingly, the blower started and ran. It does seem to be smoking quite a bit more than I would want it to though. But at least we don't need to do any kind of work to it. However, I may have spoke too soon because only an hour later I tried to start it and use it, and this is what happened. So as you just saw, it now won't start. In fact, it won't do anything. So to find out if the problem is with no fuel getting to the engine, I'm going to put some fuel into it and then try starting it. So unfortunately, it still wouldn't do anything. Now I'm beginning to wonder if somehow I lost spark to the engine. And to find out if I still have spark, I'm going to use a spark checker, but there are other ways to check for spark. And with an orange glow from the tester, it's telling us that we still have spark. Okay, so here's the deal. We've put fuel into the carb and it still wouldn't start, then we confirm that we do have spark. The last thing we need to do is to find out just how much compression we have from the engine. The tester will measure how much pressure the engine can make, and the higher the reading, the better it is. So the reading is an amazing 155 psi, which is pretty good. It means the engine is not worn out. Now you might be a bit confused about the diagnosis, so what's the problem then? I hate to say this out loud, but the problem is that the engine is completely flooded with too much fuel. So it doesn't matter how much spark or how much compression there is simply too much fuel in the engine and it's keeping it from even doing anything. Now one way to find out if this diagnosis is correct is to try and dry out the engine and then try starting it with no choke. Now there are other ways to do this, but to save time, I'm going to use compressed air, but letting it sit overnight with the spark plug out is another way. And after blowing it dry, I then installed the spark plug and then gave it a pull, and this is what happened. So as you just saw, it started and ran after physically drying out the engine, which then confirms the idea that the engine wasn't starting because of all the extra fuel inside it. So what's causing the engine to flood with all the extra fuel then? Well, you're looking at it. Now more than likely, there's something wrong with the carb and it's delivering way too much fuel while you're trying to start the engine. Now despite the brass nut on top of the carb being missing, there is a fuel mixture screw on the side of the carb, which is kind of nice to have. It makes it a whole lot easier to adjust versus the brass one, which can be quite difficult to turn. So I am not worried about most of the carb. The only part that I'm worried about is the metering diaphragm. The reason why is because the job of the metering diaphragm is to control fuel flow through the carb. So if you're having an excessive amount of flow, I'd be looking at the diaphragm as the culprit. And as you can tell from that sound, this diaphragm has lost most of its flexibility, which it needs to be able to do its job. I guess while I'm here, I might as well at least look at the pumping diaphragm along with the inlet screen. But as expected, both of those parts look to be in fantastic condition. And we'll move on to replacing the metering diaphragm and start to put the carb back together again. Now luckily you can just buy the metering diaphragm without having to buy the entire rebuild kit. And just to let you know, the stem in the middle of the diaphragm is the most important part when it comes to replacing them. Now if the old diaphragm is still somewhat flexible, you can try and save it by putting it into a rejuvenation bath. And the longer you let it sit in there, the better it is. I'd say at minimum it has to stay in there for at least 24 hours. Also, do not forget to install the gasket between the carb and the insulator on the engine. And on top of that, make sure the gasket is facing the right direction, because without the gasket, or if the gasket is installed incorrectly, it will cause the engine to have problems running and possibly even starting. Now, if you've lost that gasket or it's broken, you can try to make your own with some cardboard. However, make sure the cardboard you're using is from something like a cereal box and not a shipping box. And if you're not familiar with the fuel line routing, the fuel line from the front of the carb goes to the shorter port on the bulb, while the fuel line from the longer port goes back to the fuel tank as the return line. Now, I probably should have connected the fuel filter line to the carb right then, because if I had, I would have noticed that it was damaged. And I could have changed the fuel line with the carb out of the way, but instead, I didn't notice it until it was too late. Now don't worry, you'll see what I mean here in a little bit. So when I was grabbing the fuel line with my pliers is when I noticed that the edge of the fuel line was broken. Now, if it wasn't too bad, I was just going to deal with it, but since it was pretty severe, there was no chance of me looking over it. Now, the other return line from the purge bulb is showing some signs of damage as well, which doesn't make sense. But if I had to guess, I think someone tried to fix this blower before me, but from everything I've seen, nothing was replaced. So I'm pretty confident in saying that I think I know why this blower was given away. The short answer is reliability, and mainly in regards to its starting. So it seems that this blower has a major tendency to flood, and it's even talked about specifically in the owner's manual. That's why this blower has very few hours on it. There's a very good chance that most times it didn't start for them. I don't know about you, but if I was wanting to get extra room in my garage, I'd be getting rid of items that have little to no use for me. Now don't worry, I do plan on modifying the starting procedure to keep this engine from flooding. I guess I just got lucky the first time starting it, and it caused me to question why someone would give away a working blower. Now once the fuel lines have been connected, we'll purge the system and then try starting it, but this time without the choke. So the good news is that it started and ran. Now I did need a bit of tuning, but we'll talk more about that here in a bit. But the bigger question is, will it start back up? So it seems to be running a lot better than before. You can also tell there was a lot of oil trapped in the muffler that's burning off as it gets a lot hotter. So I did do a bit of tuning on the carb. I squeezed the trigger and then adjusted the screw so that the engine speed was at its highest. But you can't leave it there, otherwise the engine will burn up after a season of use. Instead, turn the adjusting screw counterclockwise a bit to add just a bit more fuel. This will keep the engine from getting too hot and wearing out faster than it should. So if I was going to modify these starting instructions, I would include trying to start it without the choke before you follow the printed instructions. And doing this one simple task might mean avoiding a very frustrating starting experience. So if your blower, trimmer, or even your mower starts one time and not the next time, this might be what's happening to your machine. And as for this one, I'm going to use it a couple more times around the yard to see how it works and then decide what I'm going to do with it. Now I do think this is a good machine, it just wants to flood if you're not careful with it. Now would replacing the carb fix the problem? Maybe, but right now I don't have a good reason to do that. So my question is, what would you do with it if this was your blower? Try and fix the flooding or just live with it and work around the problem instead? Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions about this project or about your own projects, and I hope to see you in the next video.